Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today we are getting away from some of the uh, really in-depth political discussions and historical conversations that uh, the channel's been doing during the week. And I hope everyone really enjoyed their 4th of July, and I hope uh, it was educating. The episode I did on rethinking the revolution, as well as the episode I did with Vonday Radio about contemporary counter-revolution. But now we're going to have a little more fun this week or weekend, hopefully. And Mr. C is back with me to discuss what about Star Wars captured the imagination. So, Mr. C, welcome back. How are you doing?
Good, Connor. Thank you again for having me. And hey, guys, and happy Fourth again. And yeah, check out those videos. Sometimes we talk about the Protestant Reformation as a Protestant revolt, and with Connor's video, you think about the American Revolution and think about it as American revolt as well. So
Yeah, and
interesting
the
stuff.
and the week, and I am doing a series on the Protestant Reformation from Hilaire Belloc's perspective. Different character. I'm going through a book he wrote on the characters of the Reformation. So, which I did an episode about that a week before. But anyways, so one of the main inspirations um, for Star Wars comes from Joseph Campbell. So, Mr. C, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Joseph Campbell was a mythologist and mysticist, and he wrote a book where this is laid out, the hero with a thousand faces, and it basically he went over a lot of different myths and stories throughout different traditions, whether it's Greco-Roman or Asian, and tried to find some commonalities between those things. And he has said to have found about usually broken down into seven journeys that a character goes through, and that most stories follow this pattern. And that you can also plug in, it's basically like an archetype or skeleton where you can plug in different aspects of the journey in fiction. And this has been very popularized and also used in even in the business world also. And it's been taken because the structure of how this growth that's common to a lot of people, this universalism. And um and yeah, and it's said that Joseph Campbell's greatest student was Uncle George Lucas himself, and it's usually talked about in Star Wars documentaries, in different aspects. So it's very interesting to see how Star Wars trilogy, especially at the original trilogy and especially A New Hope, really follows this pattern. But you can see this pattern all throughout, whether it's Marvel movies, DC movies, or either just movies in general. How this structure not only applies to just fiction, but also you can apply it to different aspects in life.
Gotcha. So there's this um the sort of hero's journey aspect that comes, I believe, from Campbell, right?
Correct. So explicitly from him, he took all these traditions, but he's the one who actually nailed them down and actually put a name to them and a specific context to them. Yes.
So can you take us through sort of that, how that maps onto Star Wars?
Sure. We can go through the seven steps that it's usually broken down. The first step is the ordinary world. And the ordinary world is basically the common world where you live in, where nothing is really special, the day to day, mundane life. And if you map that onto Star Wars, especially A New Hope, we have Luke being a farm boy who yearns for something more, like that specific scene in the where he sees the twin suns setting in A New Hope, and he's asked his uncle about what's out there, and he really wants to go to the academy, but his uncle doesn't let him. So it's basically setting up the scene, and about you have to understand what the setting is before the action or adventure can come to you. So that's basically the ordinary world, the mundane setting, and basically the default setting of how one lives. Step two would be the call to adventure. That's the breaking in into that ordinary world. You know, Gandalf visiting Bilbo, right? Or it's the droids appearing to Luke, and Luke finding, watching the Tantive 4 getting attacked by the Star Destroyer through his binoculars. I think that's a deleted scene in the novel, but that's basically he knows that there's something going on, and it's basically that breaking into the extraordinary into the ordinary, and it really jolts the main protagonist or the hero into some sort of like, okay, there's something going on out here. Let me answer and to see what's going on, and that really happens in New Hope. And Luke with the droids, and then the droids escaping, and then the droids try and him trying to find the droids as he finds them with the Sand People. Step 3 is basically the refusal of the call. He rescues the droids. If we go into the New Hope analogy, Obi-Wan is there to shows up as a wise and old leader and the mentor. He's not explicit that yet, but he'll become that. But he basically tells Luke a little bit about what's going on. So he breaks in more into that ordinary world, make sure to let him know that there's more to this world, and that his yearning and his the fire that it's in him should be, I guess, exercised in a way. And from there, the hero says, "You know what? I hear you, but I don't want to do it. There's something that's holding me back. I have responsibilities or duties that are just holding me back. That's extraordinary world. That's fine to get a taste of it, but I'm fine where I am here." And step 4 usually it's a goes along with it a little bit. It's basically he meets new people, he meets the Obi-Wan explicitly, and from there he has to make a decision whether or not this is going to be part of his life, if he's going to stay in the ordinary world, or is he going to go and up to adventure. So then comes the step number 5, which is crossing the threshold, the point of no return. This is where he has to make a definitive decision. And sometimes these decisions are forced upon us. For Luke, it was the death of his uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and that really cements his decision that there's nothing for him there. So the decision is made for him because of the Empire's actions. So from there, he makes a decision. I guess he could have stayed in the Lars homestead and rebuilt, but he decides to go with Obi-Wan and actually, and the damn foolish idealistic crusade father once did. And from there is step 6, which is basically the ordeal, they call it, or the transformation of the battle. And this is where he faces off against his biggest challenge. This could be the big chunk of him going to the Death Star, rescuing Princess Leia, which is something we want to talk about later on, about rescuing the princess and facing dragons. But facing the Death Star and also returning to the Death Star to actually destroy it, as that's really almost like the main antagonist, not Darth Vader itself, but the Death Star, and Luke facing his destiny. And then the last step is step 7, and that is that he, in a way, completes his task, faces his demons, and he returns. But he returns as a changed person. It's Luke the White, or Luke the Transformed. He's no longer the farm boy. He's a farm boy with experiences and scars from war, and he destroys the Death Star, but it changes him as a person. So one more time, the step 1 is the ordinary world. Step 2, the call to adventure. Step 3, the refusal of the call. Step 4, meeting the mentor, allies. Step 5, crossing the threshold. Step 6, the ordeal or the battle. And step 7, the return. So all these really mapped on. And again, you can do it for A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, even the prequels or the saga as a whole. But it's really just apparent how Lucas took that and basically plugged in his characters. And again, it's this monomyth that is found in a lot of cultures, and it's really, as human beings, we're wired for that imagination. We're wired, I think, for wanting to follow that journey, and it really entices us. So when it's done well, you don't even notice it, right? It's really just something that you just enjoy, and you can watch 100 different movies with the same basic structure, but it's the way that it's presented that it makes us enthralled and wants to follow the protagonist. So,
Indeed, and it's true that it's sort of a style that goes across many cultures, and it's just incredibly enjoyable because you're taking somebody from basically you're taking somebody on an adventure, you're making somebody into a hero, and in many ways we all want to be heroes.
we do, especially talk about I guess, the male experience. We do want to be a protagonist. We want to use our time, treasure, and talent for something. And I think we have that yearning, and that you're one that's never satisfied. And I think it really speaks to that.
We want to do something worthwhile, and these steps are basically able to draw somebody who's basically doing absolutely nothing with their life or nothing majorly important, I guess, into a world where they actually have an important prominent role to play.
Yeah, it's really following your vocation or your calling, right? It's like it's almost bit inbuilt in you, and it's you answering that call and actually fulfilling that, even though you don't know how it's going to be or how scary it is. It's really making you a fulfilled person by following that. And the initial steps are, you know, could be scary, but it's like almost like it's like your destiny to follow these steps, because that's what, in our lens, that God calls you to do.
Yes, the refusal of the call is a very important step, I think, because you have a situation where you're not necessarily like, it would be easy to say no, and your instincts are to say no because you're putting yourself on the line if you do accept it.
It's really the first inklings of adulthood as well, because in some sense the ordinary world may be laid out for you, so you're going through the mundane steps of doing the same thing over and over again. So this is where you take ownership of your actions and decide to, okay, am I going to answer this call? And the refusal of the call is almost like, I like that my safe space. I like my patterns and
The safe
routines, right?
space.
This is unknown, and I don't like it, but it is an important part of growing up. And initially refusing the call, but almost you have to reassess it as well. That's part of it. It's always that refusal, or you don't want to go all in, and then something happens, whether in your life or other circumstances, that forces you to uh, actualize your potential in a way.
Which is interesting because our sort of youth has been in our society has been made much longer, because more or less this sort of ordinary world, you if you're on the path, sort of the college path, your ordinary world is going to exist till at least you're like 22, 21.
Yeah, and I think you might know about this, having more of a European history background, but it's this whole teenage era is really a relatively new, quote unquote, invention. You're a child, and then you grew up to your responsibilities, uh, and then you went up to adulthood, because when you got older as a child, you were like an apprentice. You were trying to learn and mimic your father or your elders, and becoming and take on those household responsibilities. So that in between period was really muddled, and it was basically a transition period that went quickly from childhood to adulthood. It wasn't really arrested or elongated, or as it is now.
And Luke is more or less like, I think he's like 19. Is that what he's supposed to be?
I'm not sure, 17, 18, 19, something like that. He is, yeah,
I
late
think
teenage. Yeah.
Mark Hamill's on the young side in the movie.
Yes, especially compared to Harrison Ford, who was like late 30s already. Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of the two are compared. I mean, they're set up together to contrast each other.
Yeah.
Han Solo has been beaten down by the world. I mean, he's already a smuggler, so it's not like he's doing the most admirable things all the time. Though I guess in this world where the Empire is dominant and it's a considered an evil empire and that sort of thing, it makes sense that a smuggler would be more useful, I guess, would be a more useful or a semi-noble sort of profession at this point.
I guess I'm about to say like a bounty hunter. It really depends what job he takes, right? What is he smuggling? But I guess by default, that means the Empire would do everything in the open. So by default, smuggling would be either criminals or rebellion, right? Because that's the people who would be hiding from the Empire. So
Yeah, and he's I mean, in some ways, I think it's calling back on this idea of sort of a noble pirate kind of thing, privateers kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, he's the smuggler with the heart of gold, right? Like you're supposed to like him, and not and if we compare with somebody else, Beckett or somebody from his movie, he has a code, right? Like somebody who, even though he's beaten down by the world, he's cynical, right? He doesn't believe in the. He's seen stuff, but he doesn't believe like Indiana Jones. Maybe not Indiana Jones. I'm trying to think of another character. Maybe Scully from X Files, who sees like the paranormal every day, but doesn't believe that there's there's something more out there. I'm like, you literally just saw a UFO, but you don't believe. But anyways,
Well, yeah, and it's kind of interesting that I mean, it's more like Han Solo's ignoring what's in front of him. He just wants to go off and be by himself and do whatever he can to avoid confronting the problem. I mean, because he doesn't really have a life for himself.
no, that's even in the New Hope. That's evident, and it's further fleshed out in Empire Strikes Back, and yeah.
Because having a life for yourself, like putting together something, you know, settling down, marrying, you know, finding a woman to marry, you know, I mean, he's on this buddy, you know, traveling situation with his Wookiee, who's, you know, sort of half like dog, half human, or you know, half person.
Yeah, it's almost like he can choose to move forward in the hero's journey, but he just doesn't want to. He's like, I can do the call to adventure, but I want to also go back to patterns of repetition of just looking out for myself and just keeping my head low and just making it and just not thinking about the greater picture or how everything ties together.
I think that's why it was so disappointing the way the sequel trilogy treated Han Solo. Is because he really continued to stagnate for like, actually he went backwards. He went backwards 4 or 5, you know, like after 20 years or whatever.
Yeah, he was General Solo. I think in the EU he went up in rank. I think he eventually retired, but he was always trying to help and with the rebellion. And here it seems like he just quit and went back to what he knew before, the smuggling. That was very disappointing with episode 7. But
And just, you know, also abandoning your wife too.
right, because she's grieving too. It's not just him. They're both grieving, but he left her.
Yeah.
And as a husband, that's a big deal. Taking care of your family and through hardship. So,
which is barely even discussed, I would say, in the sequel trilogy, because it's not real. I mean, Star Wars is explicitly about fathers and sons, and they more or less detach family from the center of the story in the sequel trilogy.
they really do. I don't know what they were thinking. If you're gonna undo the happy ending in Return of Jedi, you had to put it back together. It's almost like they didn't know how to do that, and they just decided to default. Let's remake A New Hope, and we have the story we want to do, and we just have to squeeze in the characters, even though it doesn't make sense for them to act the same way. As long as the story can be fulfilled, that's their priority. And it's not even like it was a good story. If it was a good story, you can almost forgive if some characters don't quite fit, but the story wasn't that good for them to break the characters.
Yeah, one of the crazy things is that they sort of break Han Solo, you know, off in the, you know, in the sequel trilogy, but they also, in the, like, even like I've read some of the novels that take place in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and Han Solo is still with Leia, like in those novels, and he seems, you know, like they're kind of doing their own sort of thing. She's in the Senate, and he's he's like racing, or
He was a racer or something. Yeah,
he's like he's managing racing games. You know, he's basically become like a leader of the, you know, the head of the football league or something like that. You're like head of NASCAR, but space NASCAR or Formula One.
I think people expected after episode 7 that there would be a good reason for that breakup, so that's why they still had them together right before episode 7. Like people just thought there would be good reasons for everything that happened, and for the status quo in episode 7.
Yeah, I mean, everyone expected, like, but even the writers expected people just to kind of expect that there's a good reason, but not need to give one.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Anyways, but so these basic archetypes we're talking about, we have sort of the sort of the pirate archetype, and then you have sort of Luke, who is sort of the hero, the protagonist, all pretty much all good, with some little moments of anger, sprinkled to make sure he's, doesn't seem, entirely perfect, and sometimes making rash decisions because of lack of experience. But those are the sort of the weaknesses of his character. But for the most part, he's pure hearted.
He is, and that it's almost like the best position to be, so you can go through the trials and face your shadow self, which is another archetype. It's the shadow, which he does in Empire Strikes Back when he goes down the cave or under the magical tree or whatever it's called, and he faces his demons. So yeah, I think it's important to get your character to be not squeaky clean, have some edge to him, but also have one that you can relate to. So almost like a vanilla character, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for your hero or protagonist to be, at least in the beginning.
Well, yeah, because he captures the imagination, because he seems closest to any male that is watching.
Right, and then he's very universal in that aspect. Yeah, I mean, I always related to him more than Han Solo. He's still well, he was my favorite, and especially Return of the Jedi Luke. Especially looking back, how much he has grown and changed. Like that's like almost like a masculine arc, right? He becomes a Jedi Knight, a defender of the peace, and really fulfills what other Jedi has failed before him. So
yeah. And just
right,
remember,
it's a great.
I mean, we're talking about sort of the sequel trilogy in the sense of like comparing, because sort of the original trilogy captured the imagination of millions, and then the prequel trilogy did the same, but maybe to a lesser degree. Though I think people saw more possibilities with the prequel trilogy. At least my generation saw a lot more possibilities in the prequel trilogy, even if they weren't sort of fleshed out or as done well by the 3 movies. And then the sequel trilogy is just more there as an example of what not to do, or it's something you can sort of put away and be like, well, that's really just sort of, it feels more like an alternate universe.
I mean, it's a normie take, but it's a correct take, and that's just the prequel trilogy had all the concepts and ideas there. It's just the execution was poor, but then came like the video games and the novels and other things to help it fleshed out, and it really showed how rich that your imagination. You can just imagine things like when you see a scene, like, okay, you can almost imagine what's happening on the other side of the opera, or any real scene, or when they go to different planets, how lush the planet is, and it doesn't seem like a dead, it seems like a living world. So the prequel trilogy did that, and really portrayed the downfall of a corrupt republic in a way that's, it's generalized, it's made simple, but it's still really something that I think opened the eyes to a lot of people about how that happened. That famous Alex Jones explains the prequels. It's good. It's good stuff.
I've never seen that. Did he do an episode about that?
Yeah, it's a YouTube. He did it like 5 minutes of it, and he talks about the Moidians and how it all starts with the taxation of trade routes, and how it's Dooku, or it's like a Bin Laden figure. It's really, it's kind of crazy, but it's kind of fun.
It's entertaining. Okay,
yeah.
I'll have to check that out at some point. Yeah. But
Sargon also had a commentary on Alex Jones's rant. Is pretty funny too. You can find his commentary as well.
Did he? Yeah, it's probably been deleted though.
Maybe. I remember finding a couple months ago. It's one of the few ones I go back to, a couple of clips, and that's one of them. But yeah.
Okay, well, you'll have to send that to me if you can find it again. But anyways, so we have sort of the hero's journey. We have the hero, the pirate, sort of the scoundrel, archetype, with those two. And then we have the wise old wizard, or the wise man, sort of the mentor character for in Obi-Wan, in Old Ben, that sort of thing. Alec Guinness does a superb job, portraying the character, which, I mean, just think about the fact that it captured Alec Guinness's imagination. That's one of the reasons why Alec Guinness took the role, because he originally thought it was, because it was a battle between, good and evil on the face of it. He thought it was a very good sort of moral tale.
And he sells it too. I mean, when he talks about the Clone Wars or just reminiscing in the past, even tonight we can plug it in with the sequel, with the prequels and other media. Even without that, you can just feel like there was something happened to him, and like he really embodies the role. I think he is a great. All the actors are great for the roles, but especially him, I think, really nails it down and really makes us believe in this world of Jedi Knights and the Force.
Well, that's because he's a sort of theater actor. Alec Guinness is sort of him and maybe Peter Cushing are the sort of highest trained actors in A New Hope. Sort of the best trained actors.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, you were talking about off air, Christopher Lee really fits in that bill as well as a theater actor, and really brings a lot of gravitas to his role in the prequels.
True. That's kind of that's why sort of Christopher Lee was cast as Count Dooku, because Dooku is supposed to be sort of a fallen version of old Ben Kenobi.
And I think Ian McDermott as well. He's also a theater actor, so
he is, really, but he doesn't come in the first A New Hope.
No, you're right. You're right.
He sort of and he kind of is the antithesis to Obi-Wan. He's sort of, or maybe the Yoda. I mean, it makes sense because Yoda battles the Emperor in the Revenge of the Sith. So they kind of are opposites, and you're supposed to see Vader and Obi-Wan as opposites, and sort of
I think
the dynamic.
Yeah, it seems in episode 1 and 2, it's a contrast between Obi-Wan's teachings and Palpatine's teachings, and then in episode 3, it's really when it's between him and Yoda really are the ones who are pitted against each other. I mean, literally, right, like you said, and as they fight each other, as embodiments of both the good side and the dark side. So.
And when you were talking about sort of the hero's journey, you made a lot of Lord of the Rings references. I don't know how much Lord of the Rings had affected George Lucas's mindset. Do you have any idea if George Lucas has ever talked about Lord of the Rings?
No, not at all. I know he talked about Flash Gordon, the old serials, even Dune, the novel Dune, but Lord of the Rings specifically, or Tolkien, I'm sure he has, but it must be very rare because I don't recall at all mentioning that.
It does just, I mean, the wise old man figure is a pretty consistent archetype. So it's not impossible that Tolkien didn't have any impact on George Lucas's ideas, but it's just kind of interesting that sort of this sort of naive kid. I mean, in Lord of the Rings, Bilbo's not really naive exactly. He's like 50. So, but from a hobbit's age, he's definitely like never gone anywhere. He's more like Uncle Owen.
Yeah, definitely.
Uncle Owen sort of refusing any interest, and it's given the impression that Uncle Owen in New Hope, you're given the impression that Uncle Owen and Luke's father actually spent more time together, like that they had some knowledge of each other more so than their barely screen time in the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, I think just for that episode 2, yeah. I don't think they even meet again in the Clone Wars or any other novel. But
no, I mean he never Anakin goes back to Tatooine once and doesn't even meet up with his
Stepbrother, right?
stepbrother. Yeah, that's what it is. I was like, how are they related again? I had to think about that for a second because it is a really bizarre, because it's not really an uncle. They're not really related to him, Luke, at all in any legal sense, probably.
Yeah. Does Aunt Beru mention that she wants a child in episode 2 or no? I'm just curious.
No, I don't think so.
I'm like, Obi-Wan just shows up at the door with the child, like, here, do you here you go. Here's
Yeah, just we never hear that conversation because at the end of the day, it's probably not that important. But that it would be interesting to know what Obi-Wan had said to them, because then that might have given us maybe an understanding of what Uncle Owen thinks happened to Anakin.
right. We never actually truly know, but I mean, kind of like you said, it paints a picture in New Hope that he knew him more than he actually did. So that's why he's great for Luke.
Well, that's why I'm thinking maybe he's just repeating sort of some things Obi-Wan had originally said, that Obi-Wan was trying to get around. But then, why would that make him sort of enemies with Obi-Wan is kind of strange to me, because he kind of wants to keep Luke away from Obi-Wan.
I think it's really you can tell Uncle Owen loves Luke. He just wants to keep him safe. I mean, he's just rough about it, but he does care about Luke, and he doesn't want him to. Obi-Wan probably told him that Anakin fell to the dark side. He probably didn't know he was Vader at that point or anything like that, but he just doesn't want that for Luke as well. So
yeah, and the next sort of main archetype is the damsel in distress. The damsel in distress is a little bit subverted with this, because Princess Leia, is able to handle herself a lot more, but in principle, she still falls into the category of damsel in distress because she is about to be killed by Vader, or sentenced to death by Tarkin or whatever it was, and they do have to sort of come rescue her. There is that little funny moment where it's like, you're here to rescue me, what's the plan? And then she sort of has to sort of take charge because they don't really know what they're doing.
I guess I wouldn't use the word subverted. I think I just play around with that trope and make her into a spunky and somebody who's not willing to take it. So,
well, you don't think that's like, she's not super grateful. Like, the damsel in distress wants to be saved, and
she does want to be saved, but I guess the grateful part, she just shows it in a different way. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving too much to Uncle George there, but I never saw it really as a subversion. I thought it was just playing with the trope to make it different and sure that she's strong, but that at the end of the day, she still needs to be rescued. Like, she can't do it on her own.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's but I think that one of the reasons why we're drawn to her character is because sort of we have the "help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope," and like Obi-Wan, it's sort of seen that Obi-Wan was at one point sort of a protagonist character, a hero. He could have had a hero's journey, or he has one in the past. At least that's the impression we're given from A New Hope. But then but he's too old. He can't do it himself. And that's what brings sort of Luke on board.
Yeah, her message to him really does paint a picture of him being a general fighting, the Clone Wars, and it really, again, further lets your imagination take over. And that's, a big part of this episode, how Star Wars lets you do that. Even without all the extra material, there's a sense of urgency and depth that's there. So, yeah.
Now let's look at, so how does Anakin's story map onto the hero's journey.
That is interesting. I mean, he has his ordinary world being a slave in Tatooine, due to the huts and whatnot. And I guess, what would you say his call to adventure is? Winning the pod race, or what would you say that is?
Let's think about this. Could it be meeting the queen, maybe?
He does get infatuated with her. What makes him leave when he talks to his mother? I guess it's really Qui-Gon's the catalyst, right? Him
I
needing
guess
to help Qui-Gon and the Outworlders, whatever they're called.
Qui-Gon talking to him, like, do you remember outside, sort of talking about midichlorians and stuff like that, and all the different stars and all, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess he was also interested in that a little bit, right? Talking about like he wants to see all the, what does he say? All the stars, all the planets. He does say he
All the
wants to see.
planets.
Yeah. So he's almost like giving him, okay, this is in you, so let me further develop that. And just winning the pod race and him being freed gives him that out for him to, I guess, to really go on the adventure.
Is his, he does kind of have a refusal in some way when he learns his mom can't come with him.
Yeah, that is, yeah.
What's the next one?
It's a meeting of the mentor or gaining allies, and that's kind of steps 3 and 4 are really kind of bound together, because he meets Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon is his mentor, and meeting his allies, he meets R2-D2, he meets the Queen, he meets the people who are going to shape the rest of his life.
Part of the call to adventure, is helping the get the parts they need, I guess.
And then crossing the threshold would be that point of no return. I guess I'm still thinking about the Phantom Menace, and what point does Anakin cross that?
Leaving his mother? Getting attacked by Maul, maybe?
Possibly, because he can't go back to the normal life, right? Because then the Sith or the Maul or whoever is going to go be after him, or his mother at that point. Meeting Qui-Gon has forever changed his life. So,
or is it like joining the Jedi Order? Could he could go back, I guess.
I guess he could, after the Jedi take care of the problem that's Maul or whatever, the Trade Federation. He could always, you're right, he didn't have to accept to be part of the Order. So,
it's sort of at the end of the Phantom Menace, when he's seen next to Obi-Wan with sort of the Padawan braid and look. What's next?
So after step 5, crossing the threshold, step 6 is the ordeal or the battle. And I think that's more self-explanatory. I think he helps by getting into the Naboo starfighter and real pod racing.
Well, this kind of comes to one of the problems with the prequel trilogy, I think, because the prequel trilogy kind of has this cut up a little bit because he's so young. Like, you could argue the battle wouldn't come involved until he's actually like able to do it, like until he's past the bit of no return.
And he hasn't actually accomplished that yet. You're right. It's almost like it skips a step, or
because he could go back after he destroys the Trade Federation ship.
Yeah, the only thing that changes in him would be that joining the Jedi Knights. Yeah,
and this is why I think it's less enjoyable to watch, or lower quality watching the prequel trilogy, because it's not as clear cut as the original trilogy regarding the hero's journey.
No, even if you spread it out to all 3 movies, it's doesn't map as cleanly as Luke's journey does.
And if you don't have the full journey in one movie, you're gonna sort of feel you're gonna make it's gonna feel hollow.
Yeah, because literally you're missing a piece or pieces.
Which I kind of get that feeling in the Phantom Menace, that it just feels sort of like there's less substance, less a little disjointed maybe.
Maybe, but I love defending the Phantom Menace, especially against Attack of the Clones. Growing up, people would say how Attack of the Clones was a lot better than Phantom Menace. I always disagreed with that statement, but
I think it's actually I think the Phantom Menace is actually better than Attack of the Clones.
yeah, for some reason I find Attack of the Clones boring at parts. Like before you get to the end, the third act, there, it's like a whole stretch that I find boring. If you're not talking with Obi-Wan, and I know some try to make a teenage romance. It's always supposed to be awkward, but I mean, even if it is supposed to be awkward, I don't care much about that. It's not portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's not really a romance exactly in the Phantom Menace, but they still do that sort of building the relationship with Padme, I would say, better in the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, it seemed cute and genuine, which is like,
and then it becomes just kind of creepy. I mean, I know the age differences it's kind of, in a weird way, it's creepy in the first one, but it's innocent because he's too young. Like he's not really, like, he doesn't really know what he's doing, and she's more treating him like a little brother, or like a it's more weird that what it leads to, not the relationship itself in the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, those years between episode 1 and 2, I think, were crucial to build that up. But
yeah, so I mean, how does it? How, if you just look at the Attack of the Clones, how does it map up? Or sorry, what have we gotten through all the steps? What's the next step?
Yeah, well, the step 7 was just a return. After the battle, step 6 was the battle or the transformation, and then step 7 is the return. And Anakin isn't really returned until literally he doesn't return till Attack of the Clones. So he doesn't even return to his former life. He has a new life now.
I was thinking Return of the Jedi. He doesn't return.
Well, literal, right? The actual return.
Yeah, his but what's Luke's return? I'm trying to think.
Well, he's returned as a changed man, so it's basically after he comes back from the Death Star, he has that celebration there at the end. So he returns, but he's returned as a different individual.
I guess, yeah, he's very different. As throughout the whole thing, I guess, yeah, because the ordeal, is very much sort of destructive for Anakin. He goes to the dark side. He loses everything he loves, and then his return from that is in Return of the Jedi. So it's so, like, drawn out that the prequel trilogy is almost, is kind of hard to I don't know, harder to enjoy, harder to do, like, as a story, like, harder to put into practice.
Yeah, just from a technical point of view, you really couldn't have the prequel trilogies as they stand now released before episodes 4, 5, and 6. So the way they came out, the way that it works out, because it would have been fundamentally different movies, I think, if episodes 1, 2, and 3 were the original ones that came out.
And do you think this is one of the reasons why it's, like, much more difficult for George Lucas, because of the fact that he's not really telling the story of a hero's journey? Like, is George Lucas kind of like a sort of one-note director? So, like, telling the story of somebody's downfall might be much too hard for George Lucas to get even better, or to get, like, as well as he did with the original trilogy.
I don't know if that's the case. I just think it's the case is he has great ideas. He just needs people to execute them and not himself. And he had the right people he delegated to in the original trilogy, and in the prequel trilogy, he basically was himself. With he always gets help, but he just needed somebody else to bounce ideas and let him know what to say no, and to know what to expand and what to emphasize. But I think it was there, and I just think he didn't have the right people with him like he did in the original trilogy.
Yeah, one of the problems sort of is that Lucas is making a movie and maybe writing a book or something is extremely different and involves a lot more people. If you think about it, if George Lucas had written like Star Wars as a novel, right, he would have done all of the bits himself. And if he had sort of perfected them into the quality that he wanted, it wouldn't be that hard for him necessarily to write a sequel or a prequel story, because he's done all of it by himself. While with movies, there's a lot, you need director, you need writer, you need producers, you need all these different components to work properly. And he did. He relied on, well, he kind of did it all himself the first time, though, and then he
Famously got a
relied
mild
on
heart attack.
what?
He famously got a mild heart attack doing all
Oh
that.
yes. So
stuff.
like, and then he kind of had to rely on people for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which worked pretty well. And then once he had all the money, and there's also this problem with his personal life that sort of collapsed. He kind of he got divorced. He had a kid. He got divorced and that sort of thing. So he already sort of messed up his life through his work. And I just think then going into the prequel trilogy, that was his life, or the rest of his life. And, he wasn't willing to rely on other people of capability of a good, to actually work with him on it.
And another aspect is also during the prequel trilogy and after Return of Jedi, a lot of his time was also spent not just as a creative but as a business owner. So these are independent films. The prequels were so he didn't have time to really focus and be in terms of the filmmaking and the storytelling department as he would have as the original trilogy days. So a lot of factors came into play there as well.
Yeah, this just shows that you can't do all the jobs yourself.
No, because you're gonna miss crucial pieces.
This is why if you want to tell a story all by yourself, you have to write a novel. Right? You have to write a book, because that you can do all by yourself, more or less. I mean, you even need an editor at some point, but that's just two people working together.
Right, and the editor comes behind you just to clean things up. It's not really tip for tap, but yeah, that's the way to go.
Well, you could say it's sort of a producer versus like a director and a writer. Like if you wanted to compare the two, like if George Lucas directed and wrote a movie and then had a producer in the background, sort of making sure it worked smoothly.
Yeah, missed
Right.
opportunities, but it's. I'm glad they came out, and I think they're the best that they could be. And time has been kinder to them. They're not the original trilogy, but they are.
Yeah, and he really hit sort of something at a perfect time. From my understanding, sort of the movies prior, in Hollywood were much more grim, if I'm correct about that.
Yeah, they mentioned that how it was Taxi Driver and other movies that are more about noir or really sketchy movies in the 70s. There was no hopeful filled movies, and Star Wars really helped bring that back. And along with Star Wars, later came Superman and other movies, Rocky movies that feel good movies that you can that the malaise of the late 70s, the Carter administration and Nixon gave hope to the populace at that point. At least that's the general story, and I think it's somewhat true. I mean, obviously I wasn't around there, but that's usually the reason that the timing was perfect for something like Star Wars to come out. So not only was Star Wars a good movie, but the timing was perfect as well.
And when was the moon landing? It was in the 60s, right?
69.
Yeah, so this had the people had already been sort of driven to an idea of like there's something out there, space travel type of thing, like 8 years later, and you have you have A New Hope. So sort of the imagination was already uh, piqued, the interest piqued the interest of the populace with space travel. So just putting it now into sort of a, a science fantasy setting, which it's not as, in some ways Star Wars isn't as heady as
Star Trek,
some
right?
Star Trek, or any of the other science fiction stories.
Yeah, like 2001 or Star Trek. It really is a sword and sorcery a mythology that happens to be in space, right? It's a space opera, and opera being the operative word there.
Hmm.
And it
Yes, and
helps
it's,
bring those things about.
yeah, and about families, and about drama between families in a space setting. Um, and I mean, there were a lot of just creative decisions that they made. Lightsabers, and it brought sort of a medieval. It was like a medieval future, almost, like, in a weird way. It's like a, um, what if a lot of sort of noble aspects, or what we think of as noble aspects of medieval life, was propelled into the future.
Yeah, well, kind of like Dune, but nobler and more clear cut in terms of who the good guys and the bad guys were. It's not a derogatory to say that it's a children's tale, but in a sense, it is like a morality tale, and
It's a fairy tale.
a fairy tale, even better, because I think Chesterton and Lewis and even Tolkien talk about how they're necessary and how they're good to remind ourselves of the truths in life, and those that we miss if we just stick to a strictly scientific or scientism and secular point of view. That there is some awe in the world, AWE, and there's imagination and providence in that aspect.
But I do want to think one of the negatives is sort of the, sort of the fall the fail or the flawed philosophy of George Lucas. Makes this sort of makes paints him into a corner, and lessens the um lessens some of the goodness that does come out of Star Wars. I They're just the obsessiveness of people with Star Wars, and I've had, I've succumbed to this kind of myself sometimes, much when I was younger, but you know there is some danger in these fantasy stories if they become sort of all, like, if you escape and never return in some sense.
Right, you use them. It's good to have more as entertainment, but you actually replace that as your philosophy, and not in the way that, okay, it could be helpful. It's like a study aid or a guide, but it becomes the default thing you believe, or even if it's not explicit, like just it's what you consume, so that's what you live, and you don't have any other things to ground that. That should be just part of your diet, I guess, not your soul diet, if that makes sense.
If you make it your, like, the full mythology that you live by, or that you, um basically making it into a religion, that would be that, as religion has faded from sort of prominence in society, people have in some ways replaced it with, things like Star Wars.
Yeah, because you can see why. Because it does, generally, that talks about good versus evil, and all truth is God's truth. But it's when you get deeper inside, it's like there's more problematic aspects, like Yoda talking about, very Gnostic, talking about luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Stuff like that. So, yeah, anyways, this is why I think that Star Wars really captured the imagination, because people are looking for mythology, people are looking for, these archetypes and hero's journey and all this different stuff. well done, and Star Wars came on the scene sort of at the right time for it.
Yeah, and I'm glad it did. It's still a part of my fandom. It's just not as an important, growing older and just other things have come up, and maybe it's a mixed blessing that Disney's Star Wars is so bad that it made me take a pause and reassess that as well. So, but
Yeah.
it's important because I think as we get older, we tend to downplay imagination. I think imagination can be used in a healthy way in terms of seeing what's not in front of us in the mundane world, but also thinking about possibilities and helping us grow as individuals.
Yeah. Anyways, so well said. I think this is where we should wrap it up. Mr. C, thanks for coming on. Tomorrow, Plotlines will be back with Charles Coulombe. I'll be discussing the sort of Agatha Christie indult and the recent letter from British was it British prominent people to request that the Pope doesn't prohibit the Latin Mass. Anyway, so that's tomorrow. Thank you everyone for watching, and God bless everyone. Bye.
Take care.